I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and this is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm taking the taboos of menopause and perimenopause and bringing light to the dark. No bullshit, no shame. It's time for us to gain a new paradigm in female health, out with the old and in with the new, and I'm bringing fresh perspectives from someone in the arena. I've been practicing women's health for nearly 20 years, and I'm spilling the tea on what it means to live at midlife, knowing that the best is yet to come. I'm sharing my Gen X approach to living through this transition. Sassy, a bit sweary, and always honest. Tactical tips and instantly usable information is my aim. I hope to make you laugh and that you learn something new that helps you embrace the change. Together, we bring power to the peri. Onward to the podcast. Hello, listeners. I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and I just want to thank you for being part of this beautiful community, which just feeds my heart and my soul. And I hope the words and the wisdom that get delivered here are useful for you. That's always my wish for all of my listeners. Interesting conversation to share with you today with Susie Stonefield. Let me introduce her formally. Susie Stonefield is a transformational creativity and grief coach. In one-on-one coaching programs and intimate small group deep dives, both in person and online, Susie guides her people to find freedom, relief, and lightness in their lives through the intuitive processing of art journaling. Susie has decades of experience teaching, developing curriculum, and creating heart-centered circles. She holds degrees in fine arts and education, certifications in expressive arts facilitation, and grief counseling, is a California native, and calls the unceded territories of the Machopta people, the big small town of Chico, California, home. She is a late-in-life queer cis woman, mom to 3 amazing humans, and a guitar-wielding song leader on the side. You can find out more about Susie at www.unfoldart.com and on Instagram at creativity_midwife. So that's the formal part. Susie and I had a fun conversation, which, when you're talking about grief, you never know what's going to come up. But man, did I learn a lot. And she's a great, great teacher. When she reached out to me and said, I think I have something I want to share with your community. Would you be interested in interviewing me on the show? I got back to her and I said, what do you do? And her response stopped me in my tracks. She said, I make people cry with art supplies. Now, listeners of the show, I'm going through my own grief process right now after the passing of my mother earlier this year. And this was a conversation I was really interested in having, and it delivered. And Susie has this wonderful and gentle way about her that just makes you feel trust the minute you look into her beautiful eyes. And we talked about the permissions that women need to get past the politeness of what we think grief is supposed to be, to get to the point where grief is actually supposed to, where we're to heal it. It requires a certain amount of tenderness and self-compassion, which I think is incredibly difficult for us. I know it's been difficult for me to give myself that, especially when I feel like I've got so much on the go. Susie talked about the wordless heart, which she accesses through art journaling and helps her clientele do the same. I don't know about you, but I heard that and I thought, ooh, I want some of that. I want to know what that's about. Because we associate art with fun. And if it's a way that we can go through the process of grieving without it being so heavy or scary, which I think keeps many of us from healing it well, we just kind of stuff it down. Susie educates us through this conversation that grief is a terribly misunderstood thing, and as a society, we don't handle it particularly well. And she shares her wisdom as the crone. And she is absolutely delivering and worth listening to. I loved this conversation. It's one of my favorites of this year. she knows she pay attention for the moment where she catches me making a note on something she said, which was so profound. I have it highlighted in my notes right in front of me here. She said, "Grief is an obstruction." Hell yes, it is. And for a lot of us, when we stuff it down, that obstruction becomes a lifelong pattern. And I think that's the beauty in the processing and the therapy that art can deliver us in a way that we never have to use words. We can use art supplies. I'm all in on this process and this conversation with Susie Stonefield. She was kind enough to prepare us a workbook where you can start your own process at home, and which I will attach the link to it in these show notes. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it with her, but I've enjoyed listening to it again so that I can embrace my own grief process. Thanks for listening. If your energy levels feel low and you're experiencing digestive issues like gas and bloating, even when eating healthy, nutritious foods, imagine how you might feel during the indulgence of the holiday season. Adding a high quality enzyme supplement to your routine could make a big difference. I personally recommend Masszymes by Bioptimizers. It's a best in class supplement loaded with full spectrum enzymes for digesting proteins, starches, sugars, fibers, and fats. After you start taking Masszymes, you may notice that you no longer feel bloated after meals and that your belly feels flatter. These powerful enzymes boost your energy by increasing metabolism of your food for fuel. And by improving digestion, your body has more resources to allocate for mental and cognitive function. I can definitely vouch for these enzymes. I take them myself, and they are powerful. For the entire month of November, Bioptimizers, the makers of Masszymes, are having a Black Friday sale, their best sale of the year. All month long, you'll get discounts with my unique code, plus access to up to $100 in free gifts with purchase. You can only get this exclusive deal through my link, special for the audience of the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. You won't find this on Amazon or even on the company website. Go to bioptimizers.com/lovely and use code LOVELY to get your discount and free gifts today. All Bioptimizer supplements are best in class. If you don't agree, you can get a full refund for up to 1 year after your purchase, no questions asked. Again, the link to go to right now for this exclusive deal is bioptimizers.com/lovely using the code LOVELY, links in the show notes. This is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast, and I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and I'm excited to have a really interesting guest with me today, Susie Stonefield. You are a grief and creativity coach.
I
Ooh, we
am.
have much to talk about.
Yes,
Welcome
we
to the
do.
show.
Thank you. I've really been looking forward to our conversation. So happy.
Me too. Me too. Absolutely. So, when you reached out to me and said, "Would you be interested in discussing this on the show?" You said something to me that struck me like a bell in my soul. And when I said, like, "What do you do?" And you said, "I make people cry with art supplies."
Yep, that's what I do.
Can you
I'm
talk
proud of
about
it.
that, please? Yes.
Yes. So, I'm an artist, I'm a creativity coach and a grief guide, and um, I offer classes and private coaching to people in my art studio and online. And I think I say that line because I want people to get this is not an art class. You're not going to learn how to watercolor better or some great techniques. Although I'll teach you a couple, but it's the focus. The focus is using art supplies to feel and heal your heart. And that's what we do together.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the last time I remember anybody actually talking to me about art supplies was probably elementary school.
Mm. Mhm.
So, how is it that we're using art to heal ourselves? Can you talk about that, please?
Well, a lot of us know about healing our hearts through talking about our hearts. We go to therapy, which am a proponent of. I think therapy is very important. We go to therapy, we're in support groups, we write lots of words about our feelings in journals and daily pages and things like that. We talk to our friends, our mothers, things like that. But there is a part of our experience, and I call it the wordless heart. And whenever I talk about it, I put like roll my hands over my chest on the right, I mean, left. um, that wordless heart wants to be expressed, but not with words. It wants to be expressed with colors and images and texture and movement and sounds. And so that's why, a wail that has no words in it, someone keening with grief, that goes right to everyone knows what that means and how that feels. And an image of someone crying is very expressive of how you feel. I'm thinking of a piece that I did where there was image of a fire, like a wildfire in the brush, and it just was lines of fire and sparks, and you could see it crackling. And I put it on a page, and I say a page because I do art journaling. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But I put it on a page that was about my grief, and I didn't know why. Like, why? This is not about wildfire, is basically what my conscious, talkative brain said to me while I was playing with this piece from an old magazine. And I just trusted my heart was pulled towards this image, and this image of this wildfire on this grief exploration. And later, like whenever I go back to that page, that particular image speaks to me about the pain in my heart when I am in deep grief. Like that expresses how it actually feels to have it just like radiating out of me, where there are very few words that would really express the depth of that. And so that was a roundabout way to just describe that imagery, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I could have said that, but there's a reason why that is a popular saying, because we don't need to have the words. We need to have the color and the images to fully express ourselves.
When you're talking, what comes to mind is if somebody had taken Van Gogh's Sunflowers and
Mm-hmm.
he was not able to use the art supplies, but he had to describe it in words,
Right.
we would have missed the whole point.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big concept. I love how you describe that, the wordless heart.
Yeah.
So women in perimenopause and menopause, I have come to understand through seeing them in the office, long before I was in my own perimenopause, that there was a feeling of grief that came up a lot. And in fact, it's one of the very first episodes I recorded. I'm going to guess it's somewhere in the first 20 or 25 episodes where I talked about the grief. And at that point, what I understood it to be was that a woman was losing reproduction and the ability to have children.
Mm-hmm.
And what did that mean for us? But now that I'm in my own perimenopause, I understand that is a far deeper and wider body of water
Right.
than I thought at the time. So, can we talk about that, please?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just say I'm 62, and I went through menopause. Probably was going into perimenopause and through that starting 15 years ago. Had little kids, and I I struggled with a lot of the symptoms, but the ones that really changed my life, I think, at that time were the emotional roller coaster I was on and the brain fog.
Mm.
And having been
Yeah.
a bright and very quick-witted person up to that point and relatively even keel emotionally, I felt like a person I did not recognize. And
Mhm.
so I've heard you say that on your podcast, that loss of connection to your identity. Like, who am I? Who is this person? Who is this person who's screaming in rage?
Mhm.
Thank goodness my children forgive me for those moments in
Mhm.
their lives.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, Really the brain fog. Oh my gosh. Not being
Brutal.
able to I used to describe it as talking through jello. Like, there's a word I'm trying to express what that, oh,
That's
horrible.
pretty good, actually. Having experienced it lots myself, that's
Right?
a pretty good describer, yes.
Just
Talking
it
through
was
Jello.
horrible to not feel like myself. So anyway, to get it out of just my experience, I would say that, we know who we are. We know our identities. We are defined by certain things like being quick-witted or being a really grounded person. And then when that is not the case, it's like we've lost a part of ourselves, or we've lost who we are, we've lost our identity. And when we lose something, there is grief. And grief is not just attached to losing a person through death. Grief is attached to losing or moving into a different stage of life, losing physical capacity, losing the ability to communicate the way you usually have, losing the ability to do certain things because your body is in pain or not as flexible. It can also be, changing, letting go of your career. So another part of menopause and perimenopause is you are getting into a new stage of life, which is also a signal that certain things are going to be winding up for a lot of people, right? Closer you get to your mid 60s, it's like, oh, time to wrap up your career and go into retirement. And that is really like, you may not feel ready for that. You may not have too many options. And so you're having to see the end of something that's defined you, that's been a container for your talent and ability and gifts, and what you do, what you offer to the world. It's scary, and it's a loss.
Yeah, and grief generally is just sort of misunderstood by our society, but then you add that, layer that on top of the cluster that is the perimenopausal
Yeah,
muck, as I like to call it.
right.
And we're at a loss. We really don't know what to do with it. So if you are recognizing that a woman who is with you is in your art studio with you and she has some grief stuck or she's going through something that's she's grieving, how do you walk her through that? Can you take us through that, please?
Sure, sure. So I have these creativity mantras, I call them, and they're really the groundwork of the work that I do with people, the foundational pillars that I put my work on. And um, all of them relate to creativity, and all of them relate to life in general. And so the first one that's really important is give yourself permission. So, like you said, in our society, there's really not a lot of tools that were given for grief. In fact, and I think, misunderstood is a good way to say it, but I would also say avoided. Grief is just basically swept under the carpet. And certainly, it's like, have your grief, but please get back to work in 4 days because we don't have time for it. That's impossible. also, grief is connected to so many different things. To think that people aren't in grief at multiple points in their lives is ridiculous. And it's just that we can't, this culture, for whatever reason, just wants to think that grief doesn't exist. So someone comes into my work, into my studio, and I first want her to give herself permission to feel whatever she feels rather than feel. So a lot of women will come in and apologize for their tears, apologize for their hard stories that they're going to share with me, or even apologize for not being creative, especially, like, I love it when I get accountants because
Yeah.
they live in a different part of their brain.
Mhm.
And many, many people who do that kind of thing are not creative outside of their work, and they don't realize that what they do is also creative, but they have a lot of stories about making art, being crafty, being artistic. And so the first thing I say is give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to just let this be an experience that you're having. Give yourself permission to try something new and be creative. Give yourself permission to do this thing you feel called to do. And so the other thing about permission is it is a it's a radical act to give yourself permission. If you look up the word permission in the dictionary, it says that it comes from an outside authority source. So if we are going to give ourselves permission, the first thing we're doing is taking it for ourselves. And for women in particular, that is fabulous and essential and ripples out into many other places in our lives. So give yourself permission. Another thing I invite my clients to do is to let go of their expectations. So you walk into this space, you walk up to your table with your brand new art supplies, and you feel just afraid that you're not going to be able to do this thing. And and all the narratives of I'm not an artist come flooding in. So let go of your expectations of who you are or who you aren't. Just it doesn't matter because we are just trying to feel our hearts with art supplies. That's it. We're not making art. We're not going to make a masterpiece. This does not have to match your couch. Uh, it and it's not going to
Yep.
look like anybody else's. Like it's not going to be a painting that looks like somebody else next to you or somebody else who you admire online. This is your own personal expression. So you just need to, again, give yourself permission for it to be what it is. Let go of your expectations of who you are and what it is, and just play. Get into a state of play with the art supplies.
This is so interesting. I'm checking in with myself as you're saying. You're watching me do it,
I
aren't you?
love it. Yeah, yeah, he was.
So as I was getting ready for our chat today, I was eating my breakfast and I was watching the new Martha Stewart documentary on Netflix. And I'm at the point in the documentary where they're talking about how she sold perfect perfection,
Right.
which is very much how I was raised by a German mom who is, we do these things in a certain fashion, that German engineering mode. And so I loved Martha. I still love Martha. I resonate with Martha. I love the things she created. Could I ever do it the way she did it? Hell no. And that gave me grief as a young woman. I was like,
Yeah.
well, I've got to have that perfection. And then you come along and you're saying, step into my world and let it be what it's going to be. And you have permission
Yeah.
to let it be whatever. And I can feel anxiety coming
Yeah.
up. I'm sure you've seen this, Susie, right? You've
Oh,
seen this with the
yes. Oh,
ladies.
yes.
I'm sure you have. I can feel the anxiety coming up of, well, what do you mean it doesn't have to match my couch? And What do you mean it's going to be whatever it's going to be? And I can't draw a straight line. I'm not an artist. All those things, you just
Sure.
address them. You
Because I
just
know
address
it.
them.
Yeah, it comes up every time.
Wow. So when a woman is able to put all of that down, because I can also feel in myself the freedom on the other side of those
Mhm,
decisions, right?
mhm,
I remember once years ago, I took a water painting class, watercolors class, and I stepped in with the, oh God, this is going to be a train wreck.
mm,
And if I just put my brain aside and I picked up the brush and I
mhm,
played with the colors in the water on the palette, which totally appealed to the creative part. I love colorful things.
mhm.
Then I was able to create something that was beautiful and aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah,
But if I was in the mode of, I've got to make it look like a sunset, and I've got to make sure that there's a beautiful horizon on there, and there's got to be waves, and it's the dog's breakfast.
sure, sure. I tell people, you know those classes, paint and sip classes? I tell people I'm the
Yes,
anti paint and sip lady. Like
come stone cold sober.
exactly, like I'm not, no one's going to be muffling how they feel with some kind of substance. And yeah, you come here to feel, no question. And I also tell people Kleenex is just as abundant as paint and brushes in this studio. Yeah, because
Wow.
and no one's work is going to look the same because this is like every piece you do is a part of your self-portrait. That's what you're doing is you're just getting your story onto the page in this particular way with these particular supplies, and less is more, the you don't need fancy things for this. This is like this is like kindergartner work. It's like scribbling. I mean, it can be beautiful, it can be amazing, it can be very um full of beautiful techniques and materials and ephemera, and there are lots and lots of people who teach what I teach, which is art journaling. That's the visual art method that we use, or practice. But um, I really believe that less is more because this isn't about making beautiful art. It's just about getting out of your head and into your heart and onto the
Mm,
page.
the wordless heart, again, as you
The
have said.
wordless heart. Yeah.
Wow. So, what have you seen your clients process
Mm.
with the art? Share some stories with us, please, if you will.
Let me tell you a story about how I got into I call them deep dives because I have been doing this work for over a decade and I got into it myself. I started doing art journaling, which is, use a sketchbook and whatever materials you have, collage and paint and crayons and writing. There's some words in it too, just to express. And I got into it myself because one of my kids, I have three sons, and one of them had some really serious medical issues in his childhood and years and years of surgeries, actually. It was very, very hard for everybody. And for me, as his mom, it was full of grief, full of grief. And so I started art journaling because it seemed like a great creative practice that was focused just on the process, just on like making a page messy, putting stuff out there, and then I could close it and walk away and breathe deeply. And I started teaching it. At some point I decided to teach classes and I opened an art studio and people started coming and I did some work on body image. So I've always had a big belly. It's just how I've always been shaped. When I get fat, my fat always goes to my belly. And so I've been, people have thought I was pregnant for years, many times in my life when I was not, that kind of thing. And so shame, lots of shame. So I explored my body image in my art journals, and people saw those pieces and my students, and they were like, I want to do that work. I want to get to a place of beautiful acceptance of my body through my art journaling practice. And so I decided to teach a class called the Body Passion Project. And I advertised it and class filled up. And the first night we all met in the studio and I said, what brought you here? You know, we sat in a circle with lots of Kleenex. What brought you here? So everyone shared their story of what brought them to a class on transforming their body image narratives. And it was dark. It
Ooh.
was extremely dark. There were women who had had trouble with fertility. There were women who had never had children. There were women who were well into their 70s and women who were just entering menopause and women who were pregnant. Like we had a full range. And actually there was someone in that class who later transitioned. So
Mhm.
someone struggling with a gender identity issue,
Mhm.
right? And they told their stories and I led the class and blah, blah, blah. We did the work. That night I went home, could not sleep. I was like, oh my God, I just invited all these people to do this really, really hard work. And I'm not sure I'm capable of holding the space for them. Like that's a big ask.
Mhm.
Anyway, it all went really well. It was a beautiful program, but it led me to go back to school to get more certification. So I went back and got an expressive arts therapy and facilitation certificate and did a lot more work. And so all the work I do is about these deep dives. Grief being a big part of any of these stories that we work on, whether it's body image or healing our mother stories or transitions. So when people come in, they come in with so many different, from different places and different stories. Some of my clients have lost a person in their life. And so that's what they're struggling with. That's what they want to explore. Grief is so heavy, like an obstruction that they can't get past. They can't move around it just to live life. And you have to keep living your life despite how heavy your grief is. So they come and learn how to express it and be comfortable with it. Like being comfortable with the messiness of art supplies helps you be comfortable with the messiness of hard emotions. So that's what they explore. They make a mess on the page and it helps them express the mess. I have a client who was entering menopause earlier than expected, earlier than anyone else in her group of friends and family. It was very painful for her. And so we worked on that. We worked on just what are the stories? What are the feelings? Putting them on the page
Mm.
so that she could put them down and then feel lighter. And then the other part of it is also learning something about yourself. So when you give space in a safe place to these wordless stories, feelings, experiences, and you give yourself the time and space to express it and explore it, guess what? You learn something about yourself. You see something. I didn't know that was there. I didn't know I could have self-compassion. I didn't know I was stronger than I was feeling. But that's the kind of thing that comes out when we're exploring with creativity.
What a beautiful way to to do therapy, if you will. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that are very resistant to talk therapy, but I wonder if this way is more gentle for those folks, or at least gives them better access than just feelings and words.
It sure can. I mean, when you said that, I just remembered a conversation I had with someone recently. I live in Northern California, and there was a fire near my town several years ago in the town of Paradise. It was
Mhm.
a horrific, horrific tragedy. So I was working with someone who had lost her entire everything, her home, and some pets in that fire.
Oh,
And she
heartbreaking.
It was, and it in California, there are a lot of people, I've known a lot of people who've lost everything through fire. So she sat down with me and she said, I'm really resistant to therapy. I mean, she basically said it. I don't do therapy. And I'm not sure, I don't really do art either, but there's something about this that interests me. And she started working on her page after we had a nice long talk. And the first thing she tried to do was a happy page, like literally bright, cheerful colors. She did that for a while, and I would check in. How's it going? You know, it's okay. You know, everything's fine. She turned the page, and it was black and red and orange and more black. And when she was done, she was like, "Oh, I didn't realize that was in there, and I definitely can see what this is about." And oh, I feel a little bit lighter. I feel like I just put that down.
I am aware as you're talking that your process is going to throw a lot of women up against all the shit we thought we had to do. We have to be polite. We can't talk about the things that are polite. We got to make sure we keep up appearances, and we're always got that perfection thing that I talked about. I'm going to guess that you see that too, a pile.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is about transforming how you live your life in a way because you are giving yourself permission to be in the messiness of it. I think,
Mm,
there's something I want to say, which is it's it's so hard to go through the world being that like the perfect
mm,
person all put together when you're feeling grief, when you're carrying grief, or you're carrying rage, or you're carrying anxiety.
it's
And
the
so
menopause trifecta right
there
there.
you go, right? It really is. It really
Grief,
is.
rage, and anxiety.
Oh,
There you go.
there's one more, exhaustion.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. Right. We're gonna have to call this episode that, Susie, is what we're gonna have to do.
Oh, great. That'll be bring a lot of people in, I'm sure.
Yes, I'm sure it will. Please
Um,
go on.
it's very hard to hold all of that in a world that thinks you're not supposed to even have those experiences, or because they haven't been studying women for all these centuries, doesn't even realize that it's totally normal for you to be going through and feeling all of these things, going through all of this. And what I believe and what I've seen is that when you can make the space to embrace it and get comfortable, like even welcome it in, like, oh, hello, grief, you're back again. Have a seat. Let's
Wow.
spend some time together and see what needs to come through this time. When you can do that, oh, you can just keep moving through your life. You can actually accomplish things. You can even feel joy again when you get into a place where you're not afraid every time they come knocking on your door. The grief, the rage, the exhaustion, the anxiety. When you can say, oh, here it is again, I have a tool for welcoming you in. It's over there on my art table. Let's get messy. And you can deal with it and then put it down and move forward. It's really, you can also feel the joy of doing that, the expressive act. It's amazing. Like I had a grief class. My grief deep dive is called the geography of grief. I remember one of my clients saying that she was working on her pages during one of the weeks of the course and she felt guilty because she was actually enjoying it so much. And that was in stark contrast to just like
Mhm.
this life shattering grief she was experiencing. And so I just said, you get to feel joy at the same time.
Ugh, permissions granted all over the
Exactly.
place.
Right.
I'm fascinated. I find myself as I'm listening to you wanting to like press pause and then ponder. Okay, let's go again.
We could do that.
Yes, right? Um, this is fascinating. I want to, something keeps coming through my mind, and so I'm going to bring it up. One of the first things that I learned many years ago about how a woman's body handles emotions
Mm,
was I watched Oprah growing up when I was a kid. I think most of us in our age group did.
sure.
You may have had kids by that point. I
No,
mean,
I
I'm
was
thinking,
watching Oprah a
were
bit.
you okay? Good.
Oh, yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you had littles at home watching Oprah, right?
Hmm.
I was still in high school, so like I said, just a few years behind you. But I remember Christian Northrup on Oprah talking
Hmm.
about grief and talking about the uterus in particular being the creative center for a
Mm,
woman's body. And I remember when she said it, I mean, it's just one of those things that was like a thunderbolt. Like, I mean, I was a kid. What did I know? I barely had started my periods at that point, right?
mm, yeah.
But, and then she goes on to talk about this far more in her first book, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, which of course I read cover to cover, still have my
Hmm.
original first edition copy. And she talked about the woman's body being this vessel, but I'm quite fascinated by this creative center as the uterus. Now, it is quite true that in my 20 years of clinical practice, I have given women the assignment of creativity when they are struggling with uterine based situation. Maybe it's
Mm,
endometriosis or fibroids. Maybe it's there's a number of different things that it could be. And I find this comes up, especially when a woman has had a hysterectomy and she has
mhm,
lost the physical,
mm,
the organ itself.
right.
Now, of course, the energetics are still present. So we still operate as if it's just
Right.
not causing us trouble through the experience of an overloaded tampon, if you know what I'm saying.
Hmm.
Sorry, that's a bad time to take a drink.
No, I know. I completely know.
You get it, right?
Yep.
So, what I find is interesting, I'm mixing up some things here, but something you said about grief being an obstacle, I just feel like this is somehow connected to this whole like the uterus being the creative center of a woman's body. And like, what are you thinking as you hear me talk about these things? And did you hear Dr. Northrup say that yourself?
I read that book and I don't remember hearing that, but that resonates. My uterus was so important to me.
Mhm.
I had a hysterectomy about 12 or so years ago, and I did a whole ritual saying goodbye to it at the beach. Like I did this whole beautiful creative art piece with seaweed on the beach, basically. And
Mhm.
I had so much grief before that hysterectomy. Now, after it, I felt a lot better. I had adenomyosis, and it was like
Mhm.
impossible to have a life pretty much, and
Mhm.
anemia leading up to it. But I had to say goodbye to it in a very specific way. And actually, what you said reminded me that when I was in college studying fine art, I made a whole series of pieces about uteruses. And I had seen a baby being born. My boyfriend's sister-in-law had a baby and she invited all of us to be there in the room. And I was 18. It was completely life-changing for me.
I bet.
Witness a live birth. It was of a human. It was amazing. But I just knew there was this thread through my life of creative expression, uteruses, fertility, uh, the womb that held my children, that kind of thing. And I would not even question that the uterus could be the seat of our creative art, whether or not it's a place that held a baby, because uh, it's just such a mystery still, unfortunately, in many
Mhm.
ways.
Mhm.
And it is also such a defining feature of a
Mhm.
human who
Mhm.
carries a uterus around with her. Yeah, it really, I could see that. I could see that. And I saw you take a note when I said the thing about grief being an obstacle.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yes.
and
Express and be
that
comfortable with it is what you said. Yeah, is what I wrote down.
yeah,
Yep.
and I guess what's resonating for me right now
Mhm.
is because of the way our culture is about women in general, still, even worse sometimes
Mm,
than it used to be, that we're still struggling to be understood, and thinking about how we're raised as young girls and the shame around our bodies and periods and things like that, then we want to ignore that part of ourselves, right? Don't want to go there, don't want to have to know about it, talk about it, feel it. Well, that becomes a massive block to
mhm,
our progress. We're carrying it around all the, embodied in it is
mhm.
probably shame and denial and discomfort. And I mean, it's all sort of a spiritual thing in a way.
Oh, absolutely. Well, how can you not talk about spiritualism and art? You have to talk about those two things together, I think.
And the feminine, you know.
And the feminine, you betcha. I channeled my inner Minnesotan right there. Did you see that? You betcha.
Uh-uh.
Anyways, to the ladies from Minnesota, I love you.
Yeah.
I love you. So, a couple of things that I'm thinking about as you're talking. First is the uterus is the place where we give birth to things.
Hmm.
And, I didn't have kids of my own, never wanted to have children of my own. So my uterus has been plenty busy, but just not in the way that my biology probably intended, right? And I think about the patients that I've encountered. Here's what I want to say about this. I think this is another barrier that your work pushes through is that whole um the shame of being a feminine body owner,
Yes, yes, love
right?
that.
And
Mhm.
all of the history that comes with that.
Right.
And so, knowing that the uterus is the creative center, man, that gives you an opening for some really interesting conversation, I can imagine. And yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, the funny thing is, I forgot to even mention, of course, I call myself on Instagram and on my website creativity midwife.
Oh, yes.
I'm the midwife to your creativity. So there you go.
That's awesome. I love it. See, there's a thread. There's many
Yeah, yeah,
threads, but there's a,
always.
in working with patients for all these years, I became aware at some point through my patients just how uncomfortable women are with their own bodies.
Yes.
And it became a conversation I had with a couple I was doing fertility counseling on years and years ago. And I asked her to map her cervical mucus. And I explained to her, I said, this is not the moisture that's on the outside. This is the secretions right from the cervix. So you have to get in there and take a sample. And she was like, I cannot do that. And I was like, what? Right? So again, this has not been my own affliction, but it was one of the first times I really saw just how uncomfortable some women are
Oh,
with their
yeah.
bodies. And what was fascinating to me was that her partner was in the room and he's like, I'll do it.
Mm.
And he wasn't making it uh a sex act or anything like that. He was just like, I got no issue. I'll go in there. So
And how was she about that?
she was fine as long as it
Really?
wasn't her.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I almost did that Sex in the City thing where Samantha gives Charlotte her compact and insists she goes to the bathroom and looks at her own vulva in
Right,
the
right, right,
bathroom.
right,
I
right.
was like, can I help you here? Like, I got a mirror. Can I leave the room? Like, just take a look.
So good.
So, but I think, this is where that permissions thing comes in, whether it's
Yeah.
through the work that I'm doing or through the work that you're doing, where we can say to the sisters that had a more, um, that have a more narrow, that's not a right word, small c conservative view of their own bodies, like,
Mhm,
well, that's for somebody else, or that's
mhm,
for the doctor, that's for my partner, that's not for me, kind of thing. Which,
mhm.
let me just say, we didn't come in like that. Have you ever
No.
seen little boys with their wedding tackle? They're all over it. They can't keep their
Oh,
hands
yeah.
off it, right?
Mm-mm,
You don't
mhm.
have that problem with little girls. It's the opposite, because we have all these factions that have kept us
Yeah,
repressed. Let's just say
yeah.
that. And so it's an interesting conversation. Is it because you have all of these tools that can help us in a very short amount of time
Yeah,
bust through some of this crap that we've been given as women, programmed with since the time we were born? So
absolutely.
I get pretty passionate about giving myself and my people tools that can help with stress management, and I have a new one to share: Just Thrive Probiotics. Stress is at the root of nearly everything that makes life feel harder: sleep loss, low energy, dissatisfaction, irritability, illness, etc. We can feel powerless to do anything about it, yet our wellness depends on how effectively we can dampen the stress response. Science tells us that high stress is a foundational creator of all of the major chronic diseases. And we know exercise, healthy diet, and meditation are important, but we can still do more to stress less. Probiotics for stress, though? What? Yep. Gut health is connected to overall health, so caring for the gut microbiome can have effects on all systems of the body. Also, 80% of our immune system lives in our gut, so tending to our gut health offers us resilience and protection. The Just Thrive probiotic provides immune support, boosts health, improves sleep, promotes healthy skin, encourages healthy weight management, and supports the gut brain connection. The Just Thrive Calm features the proprietary Mood Biotic, which is the most heavily researched and verified brain probiotic available. In multiple clinical studies, it's been shown to help effectively manage stress, champion a healthy mood, maintain balanced cortisol levels, drive peak cognitive function and great thinking, promote vitality, and support better sleep quality. I love these probiotics and I feel differently taking them. I've been taking daily probiotics for 2 decades, but these are different. I am more calm, I sleep better, and I have less digestive upsets. For a limited time, you can save 20% off a 90-day bottle of Just Thrive probiotic and Just Calm when you go to justthrivehealth.com and use the promo code LOVELY. That's justthrivehealth.com, promo code LOVELY.
One of my other creativity mantras is you never know where the mess will take you.
Mm, I love it.
And I came upon that from my own work because invariably I'd hit a point in my creative process with my art journal page where it was like I didn't like the colors, or it wasn't coming out the way I had hoped it would come out, or it was chaotic and it made me really uncomfortable, and or just was getting disconnected. So at that point I would try to do something different with it to move through the mess, and invariably I would get to another place, a place I had never thought I was going to get to. And that is something I've experienced in my life. As
Mm-hmm.
much as we'd like to predict where we're going to end up,
Mm-hmm.
life has a way of being very lifey and messy, so
Mm-hmm.
you don't know. We can't predict the future very very much, and if you can embrace the mess, you can embrace the mess of your emotions too, like the messy process of perimenopause, the all of those, the hot flashes and the lack of libido and the brain fog. And if you can embrace it, as hard as that is, it causes so much grief and displeasure and frustration. But if you can have a moment where you can embrace it, it makes it a little bit easier. the next day, just to move forward, to wake up and get out of bed and have another day.
You're asking for a lot by asking women to just embrace that, you know.
I do. I know it. I
Because
do
you've been
know
through it
it.
yourself, so you know.
I do
You
know
know.
it. Yeah.
Most of us are like, oh God, we can't look. We cannot look. We
Mhm.
just have to push it away and pretend it's not there until it goes away. But the
That's right.
reality of perimenopause is that it's the neuroendocrine transition lasting 10 years,
That's right.
sometimes more. So
Yes.
it's a long period of time to not be looking at how you're feeling.
That's right. And when you were talking about, your patient with the cervical mucus and unable to be present with her own body
Mhm.
and body functions. I think of all the women who are trying to be in denial about what their bodies are going through because it's just so hard to embrace it. It's the same as emotions. It's like we have, especially as women, we have been trained to not have those emotions, to not express them, to bury them. So anger, rage, etc. Those are, I would say, anger and rage, you know, the first top two. It's not okay for the perfectly perfect women to get into any kind of messy emotion like that. And so they go hand in hand. And if
Yeah.
so, if you can be with it and do something productive with it in the process of creative expression, it's you feel freer. Oh my God,
Mm,
you feel like you gave voice to a part of yourself that doesn't get permission the rest of the time.
mm,
That's an amazing feeling.
I would say. So to the women that are listening and experiencing the four pieces of menopause that we talked about, the big emotions, anger, rage, anxiety, and exhaustion. What's your art invitation to them right now in this moment? How can they start to do that work to feel okay?
Just feel it. Like sit down with some art supplies. Simple is best. And whatever color, sit quietly and see what comes bubbling up. See what comes bubbling up that makes you say, oh no, not that. And go towards that.
Oh shit.
Set a timer. If it feels like too
Yes.
much, set a timer. Just pick one of the feelings that comes up, just that one, and do something with it. Get out a black crayon and scribble all over the page. Or um, just go towards a color, any color that's calling to you. Or pull a page out of the book and tear it into tiny, tiny pieces and then glue it down on the page. Like these are just expressive acts. And I want to point out, I'm not talking about painting a thing or a picture of yourself, even though I talked about it being a self-portrait. It's not that kind of self-portrait, right? So, but take a piece of paper and tear it into little bits and then glue it on another piece of paper is evidence of how you're feeling in that moment. So is a giant scribble all over the page. For me, a giant scribble all over the page is how I often am feeling. Like that's the best way to tell you this is how I'm feeling right now, all over the page. Like, oh, okay, that felt good. Now I can do something else.
Right, yes. Yes, you know what comes to mind as you're talking? Do you remember in the 80s or the 90s, there was the AIDS quilt that went
Yeah,
around America?
many, many quilts.
Many quilts. Okay, so I remember seeing the one I think in the mall in Washington D.C. that took up that whole space with the
Yeah,
water. And if I remember correctly, it was the families and loved ones of those that had lost their lives that were invited to bring a
yes,
representation of their loved one. And then they were all stitched together.
yes.
And as you were describing the tearing apart and gluing back, can you imagine an art exhibit of menopausal and perimenopausal women in such a fashion that would scare
Mm.
the shit out of the world?
It sure would. Ooh, that would be so
Wouldn't
good.
that be so good?
Yes. Yes. Or you could do the one that's stitched by the people who love the person in menopause. My children during those rageful moments. I'm just
I was
thinking the
gonna
art
say,
they would have made.
exactly. My husband knows he needs to be farther than an arm's length away if he's gonna say something controversial.
Right.
The things I never thought. Anyways, fascinating. But on the other side, so let's say we get this art exhibit of women in perimenopause and menopause. I guess it would likely scare the crap out of people that had not experienced menopause or perimenopause, number one,
Yeah,
to see how we've repressed all of these feelings, and then we can
exactly.
just bring it out on the paper. On the paper. So
Mm,
you have so kindly put together a workbook for the listeners.
I did.
Thank you so much for it's great. It's so good. I will attach it to the show notes. So thank you again for doing that. But I listen, I'm going to be the first one that's going to be playing with this. And I feel not just the permissions that you've shared today, but I feel the invitation of what you're offering today, which I
Mm,
think is, oh my God, it's a beautiful gift. So I would like to read something off of one of the pages that you've
sure.
sent so we can discuss it. And we've talked about this a little bit, but I love the way you've said this. So you say menopause and the journey to it, perimenopause, can be truly challenging to our hearts, souls, and bodies. With that, there's the opening to a landslide of loss. Feelings of grief arise around aging, changing body experiences, sexuality, sensuality, identity, brain fog, raging emotions, and oh, so much more. All of this encompasses an experience we haven't much been prepared for in our society. It's a lot.
Yeah,
Just putting that out there and saying it's a lot is a relief in itself.
yeah. Acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm. And so on the other side of this, we pick up simple art supplies and we feel the things and we set a timer if it's overwhelming. I know I had a therapist do that with me once regarding grief. She said, if it feels like it's too much and you're scared to dip, because I think what I said to her was that I'm afraid to dip my toe in, I'll
Yeah,
never come back out.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And so setting a timer, that's now the second time I've heard that. So,
Yeah,
uh, a way to make a container that's safe
yeah,
ultimately.
yeah. I have another one in the workbook and I call it a cup of tea. And
Yes.
I say that, imagine that this whole experience is a pot of tea. Like you just brewed your favorite tea in a little teapot or a big teapot. I'm not inviting you to pour the whole teapot out into the table. Just pour out 1 cup. Just that. Just hold that 1 cup and see what's come up in that little cup. That's easier to hold and manage and experience. And then once you're done with that, go on to another teacup. Pour another cup of tea. It's just a way to sort of envision it that feels manageable. So it can
Mhm.
be a timer, it can be a vision of a one little cup of tea, but that is a metaphor I use a lot with my work, and it helps people to just do a little at a time because it
Mhm.
is overwhelming,
Yeah.
especially if we've been avoiding it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's that container of safety, and using the tea metaphor is such a beautiful feminine thing to do.
Right.
So
Yeah.
um so why is it, do you think it's so hard for us to do self-compassion and tenderness?
Good question. Well, in my experience, women tend to put themselves at the bottom of the list. So we are caregivers, we are the carers. And so we are the ones taking care of all the people, our partners, our children, our parents, our friends, our, people at work, our clients, our patients. And it's somehow so easy to keep bumping our own needs down, 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 and at the bottom of the list. So then when we take the time to focus on ourselves, then we feel guilty. Well, that's selfish if I'm thinking about myself and my own needs. I can't really do that. What will people think? What will they say about me? They'll know the truth because it's a narrative we already have about ourselves. So for me, I mean, that's really what I think it is that we don't prioritize ourselves. And we can always go back to that. Put your own oxygen mask on first in the airplane. I mean, how many people have heard that and gone, I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm going to have to put it on somebody else. Well, we all know why they say that,
Mhm.
because you actually can't function unless you're going to have the oxygen. Same with our self-care and self, our time for ourselves.
Mm, mhm, mhm. So you are dispensing wise woman information today through the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast, of which I am truly grateful. But I will ask you a thing that I am asking the women who've already gone through the menopause muck, and that is, does it really get better?
Well, I would say yes. The best, most amazing things in my life have happened since menopause. And I'll say, except for my children, which, started well before. But um, this has been, like, I would say I'm in my third act. It's an amazing act. It's the time I found my passion, my purpose in the world. All the roads in my life led me to this work that I do with like great integrity and passion. Um, I would say my partner could complain about how my attention is always on my work because I'm just so in love with it.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of all of the ridiculous, horrible symptoms, yes, those definitely have gotten better
Thank God.
for the
Good to
most
know.
part. I would say the brain fog is at times that like articulating myself is, whew, that is really a hard one. And
It
it
changes, doesn't it?
it does, it does. I wouldn't say I ever went back to the super sharp woman that I was, but
Damn it.
those bioidentical hormones made a huge difference
Mhm.
for
Yep.
sure.
Yep.
So yeah, on the other side, so many things are amazing and beautiful, and it's different. It's a different chapter. It's not like you go back. We never do that. So
I think a lot of us wouldn't want to.
no, yeah.
I thought for sure I would miss my period. She went away for about 6 months and returned, and I was
Uh,
like, oh, it turns out I didn't miss you. Oh, God, so sorry.
I get that.
Psych. You can go back wherever you came, wherever you
Right.
were away. You can go back.
She's like,
Anyways.
just kidding.
Yeah. How very like the goddess to play that game. How very.
Mm.
Susie Stonefield, where can people find out more about you?
They can go to my website, which is susiestonefield.com, or Instagram, where I'm creativity underscore midwife.
Mhm.
And I, yeah, I post all of the things that I'm working on and offering there. I think the best way to figure out what you can do with me is to book a discovery call, which is a free, juicy conversation where you have the opportunity to be really deeply heard by me. I call it generous listening. And tell me your story. Tell me what it is that's calling to you about what you heard me say, what the work I'm doing, and then we can find the right way, the best way for us to work together.
I love that. I will be booking myself a discovery call
Oh,
so we can
awesome.
play because as I listen to you speak, I'm just like, it feels like art would be the most natural way to express things. I have lost both my parents in the last few years and my mother just earlier this year. And so I'm dancing with grief myself. And it's one of those things, it's like, oh, it's over there. God, don't look, don't look. Because the minute I
Mhm.
look, it's oh shit city. And I think this is what happens to a lot of us in midlife is that we've got kids leaving home, going off and being humans and taking care of themselves. Sometimes we're thinking about retirement.
Yeah,
Sometimes we've got that whole aging parent thing that's going on. And, the other thing I've started to notice is people I know, people in my age group, showing up with
right,
awful things going
right.
on,
Yeah,
right?
just yeah, yeah,
And so it's this
absolutely.
this sort of confluence that's a bit of a mess. And so I love what you have offered the listeners today. And I'm so grateful for this juicy and abundant conversation is what it feels like. It feels like that sort of ocean of relief and options and comfort, and that's the best way I can describe it. I'm not doing a very good job articulating how I feel about our conversation, but I just feel relief at it actually. So I hope the listeners are feeling the same way.
Thank you. I hope so too. That
Yeah.
would be a beautiful thing.
It would, right?
Yeah.
So there's two questions I ask the guests on the show. And the first one takes a little bit of setup. So I am aware that around the world there are governments that do a great job supporting women, and we're starting to see more and more of that. The National Health Service in the UK offering all women hormones replacement therapy. The same thing is in process in Canada. Availability to maternity leave is, I think, every developed country except the United States. But I know
Don't get me
that's,
started.
I know. I know. I often hear that. I will get those comments back. I'm like, ladies, I'm in Canada. So,
Right.
this is the reality. Anyways, my vision is that um, we can take menopause leave in the same way we can take a maternity leave.
Uh,
So, what if you got a year? Think about when you were in the muck of menopause. Let's say your government supported you and gave you a year off of work, of which you were paid your regular salary, your expenses were handled. So, what you got was a stipend or a bursary that would allow you to play and heal yourself in your perimenopausal years. And so, my question to you is what would you wish to have had during that time? Give me anything, really. Travel, a new
yeah.
job, a boyfriend,
Mm.
girlfriend, concubine.
I wasn't there yet.
Right. Okay. Right. Right. Right.
Let's see. Well, first of all, I think healthcare that was supportive of the transition that I was in and therapy,
Mhm.
mental health, physical health, um, and then spiritual health, or creative. So a stipend for art supplies, I would always believe in that.
A lot of art supplies.
It's a lot of art supplies. I think retreats. I think of like
Yes.
what was helpful, going away
Mhm.
from my day-to-day life with my three kids and my husband and my house and all the
Mhm.
responsibilities. So retreats, regular retreats, massages,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know,
Yes. Yeah. The
the
body workers.
soaks in warm Epsom salt baths, things that
Yes.
restored me time, it's an interesting thing. And I think that just the idea of acknowledgement by the government would be an amazing
Mhm. Step forward.
alteration to where
Yeah.
we are right now in this country where I live.
Yes.
Um, it's hard to even imagine They barely can admit
Mhm.
any of it, so that is true for women.
Yeah, that acknowledgement would be huge, would be massive. I'm aware that in Europe, women, well, actually, Europeans use these beautiful spas to recover from surgeries and
Mm,
procedures, and it's all funded.
yeah,
So, what the hell are we doing over here in North America?
not doing it right. Something else came up for me,
Yes,
which is how about a celebration? You know how I don't know, did you ever read The Red Tent?
of course. How many
Right?
times have I read the Red
Right,
Tent? You
okay.
don't like
So,
it?
like, I mean, I think one of the differences is when you get your period, like when you enter into puberty in that
Mhm.
way, it's usually fairly clear that it's starting. Perimenopause is such a like slow burn that by the
Yep.
time you figure it out, you're already like incapacitated by it.
Yes.
But wouldn't it be amazing if we had a celebration for women as they enter the crone years? I
Yes.
mean, that's basically what it is.
Amazing. Yep.
That would be, rather than what happens, which is we become invisibilized at that point.
Yep. Not it's not happening anymore. It's because of the work of women like you and I. We're
Right.
not allowing the crone to disappear. Because I
Right.
don't know about you, but I'm not disappearing.
No, no, no.
I,
I'm in that best moment. So there's no way I'm going away.
I'm getting louder the older I get
Oh,
and less
yeah, me too.
apologetic. Again, imagine if we had an art exhibit of all the rage and then all
Oh,
the
yeah.
stuff on the other side.
Yeah.
Like that kind of power in a wise woman scares the shit out of a lot of people on this planet.
Well, I
That's
mean,
why we've been repressed.
oh, yeah, this is a whole other conversation for another day.
This.
But yeah, this is the reason that it's
Yes.
the way it is now.
Yes. Yes.
No
It's true.
question.
Okay. Final question is knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
Trust yourself, have patience, and give yourself permission to do what
Mm,
feels right and to take care of yourself.
I love it.
Yeah.
Susie Stonefield, I have enjoyed the hell out of this conversation.
Me too. Me too.
Thank you
Thank
for
you
coming on the
so
show.
much, Fiona.
The information and other content provided in this show, or in any linked materials, is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice, nor is the information a substitute for professional medical expertise or treatment. We are doctors, but we aren't your doctor. Seek your doctor's opinion. If you or any other person has a medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider or seek other professional medical treatment. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have heard in this podcast or in any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The opinions and views expressed on this page and in this show have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, health practice, or other institution. Thank you.